Wait, guys, the last document was less than 2,700 words. This one is over 13,000 words. Let's all take a moment to get ready. Okay.
It's Morgan's Music Extravaganza!
Don't call it a video, call it a one-sided high-preparation conversation with visual aids. It's bigger, it's better. I thought you were trying to make it better. I am, but I'm using the popular vernacular. But how could you do any better than this?
Melodic is very good, but the other song on the album is my favorite song of all.
Nah. I can speak now, see? Hear? There are closed captions for you hard of hearing folks out there. Well, let's hear it then. Let's. I make this out of a desire, really a craving, for honest conversation between friends. Lacking this in real life, I have done the next logical thing and written to myself and talked to a camera. This is a bit more than just me talking about music, but in the ever-famous words of Bob Parr, we get there when we get there. On the whole, I'd like for this to be a conversation between me and my close friends. This would be a real conversation, but I find it's hard to get all the words out right on the spot. Not to mention sitting each of you down in our busy lives to explain all these ideas I have. So, like any conversation, you don't have to appreciate or remember everything I say. The point is that we're here now and talking and listening are enjoyable, so let's just shoot the breeze. It really deserves it. Okay, so that's the intro. Next, I'll go through my musical history with some occasionally colorful language. Then I'll talk about some of my habits as they have to do with my music collection, including a short explanation of pulse code modulation. Oh, great fun. Then I'll move on to some elements of music that I enjoy and more info on how I how I got into a new genre. You'll have to find out what it is later. Then I'll put some thoughts down on instrumental music and the concept of loving an album and how that's analogous to something else. It gets a bit philosophical there. After that comes some musings on the huge amount of music in the world and how that's navigable, including some words disregarding musical greats, as I have termed them. Nearing the end, I'll talk about both dynamic and temporal range in music. Cool stuff. Next to the end, I'll review some of the albums I've acquired since we last spoke. Finally, I'll end with some recommendations for future entertainment. That about does it. On to music history then. As you may remember, I've been listening to music for a while. Yes, I'm going to talk about my music history again, but you probably don't remember much of it, so allow me to explain now with a year of college under my belt. Since I did my last video, I've done some digging through my email, iTunes, Amazon, and HD Tracks history to piece together a more precise timeline of my music listening history. In the ancient annals of time, I bought some Beatles albums on iTunes. This was the beginning of freshman year, August 22nd, 2014. Given that date, I can say with reasonable confidence that it was the summer after 8th grade when I started my musical journey in earnest with the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour on YouTube, a site that I still use for testing albums. Yeah, I remember listening to Magical Mystery Tour at my friend Lake's house. He even bought I'm the Walrus eventually, which wasn't enough for me. I wanted him to get the whole album. I guess even then I thought there was something good about listening to a whole album. More on that later. Anyway, that first iTunes purchase was pretty good stuff. Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, The White Album, but I also got Help for some reason. For those of you who don't know, Help isn't that great of a Beatles album. Everything herein is my opinion, by the way. Next year, in summer and fall, I got my first albums on CD, some auxiliary Beatles albums, Anthology 2 and 3, Let It Be, Naked, and to be exact. That Christmas, I took a belly flop into the Beatles music when I got into the mono box set of the Beatles on CD, currently sitting in my closet. In the Ides of January the next year, I got my first non-Beatles album, Deceit by This Heat. I remember playing Fallout 4 while I was first listening to it. I was walking around this location on my first listen, I believe. I used to play video games a lot while listening to albums, actually. I remember playing Skyrim while listening to Beatles for Sale around here. I also remember listening to Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road while playing Borderlands 2 around here. More about Deceit, though. It's kind of a miracle I ended up liking it, because up to that point, the only serious listening I ever did was of the Beatles. If you listen to Deceit, you'll notice it's really weird and punky, with brooding and dark messages and even some avant-garde sections. Somehow that didn't put me off and it interested me enough to buy the album eventually. Maybe my musical taste was so undeveloped that it was easy to like something new. In any case, I followed that up with the Beatles stereo box set as soon as school got out. We're now up to May 2016, by the way. My Beatles collection was more or less complete at that point. We don't have to talk about them anymore for now. What's more interesting is my first Godspeed You Black Emperor purchase that June, Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven. It was also the first in a now rich little collection of instrumental and or post-rock music. I was probably still lucky to have discovered Godspeed You so early in my musical journey. I found them in This Heat on recommendation, and I don't know where I'd be without those recommendations. Maybe I would have just stuck to classic rock. That would make all this much less interesting. Then again, maybe I would have just gone in an equally interesting but totally different direction. We'll never know. But as for Lift Your Skinny Fists, this was back when I listened to music while playing video games. I specifically remember playing Borderlands 2 and the Tundra Express while listening to Lift Your Skinny Fists. I was also listening to just the right channel, as this was when I was experimentally listening to just one channel of Beatles songs, because often the two stereo channels in Beatles songs sound drastically different, and this is frequently fascinating. In any event, I followed up that purchase the next month with most of Godspeed's discography. I got all those albums on the Pauna Music Store, which doesn't exist anymore, but luckily the email receipts they sent me still do, so I know exactly when I got those albums. I got them for a steal too, $4 for Alleluia and Asunder, and $5 for Yankee UXO. Those are still some of the best deals I've ever gotten for some of the best music I have. The enjoyment per dollar on those is off the charts. Well, enough of that. That Christmas, I went out completely on a limb and got Led Zeppelin 4 and Physical Graffiti. The only basis for these purchases was listening to Stairway to Heaven in the car with my family one time and knowing Kashmir existed. I also, of course, listened to these two songs on YouTube a bunch and took a cruise through the Wikipedia articles for the two albums, but I had only listened to the two songs. I would never just take a chance like that again. Well, not until Godspeed You released a new album senior year, but I'll get to that later. Luckily, I ended up liking Led Zeppelin 4 and Physical Graffiti, so that's all well and good. This was my first foray into classic rock beyond the Beatles, a genre I'm still exploring. Moving on, in March 2017, I got Breakfast in America and G-Boat Annie. These two albums started with me liking The Logical Song and Magic Man from the radio. Anyway, more classic rock, cool. They're great albums, but I must move on. That June, I got Fly By Night, and unlike The Contender, Rush has other albums that were more successful, but I went straight for Fly By Night for some reason. This one started with me watching Game Grumps, I think. Dan sometimes mentioned how good Rush was. I remember listening to Fly By Night on YouTube and not thinking it was terribly amazing, but I kept listening to it again and again for some reason. I think I just had a desire to like it, a powerful force I'll elaborate on later. With Fly By Night, I also got Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, also known as Leningrad. I guess around this time I had been listening to it on YouTube. I believe I was trying to find classical music for some reason. Maybe I was thinking about how I play classical music in band, and sometimes I enjoy hearing it, so it's only fitting that I should own some for my own close listening. Anyway, I stumbled across Leningrad and really enjoyed the first movement. For those of you who don't know, the first movement has a killer motif or melody or theme or whatever, insert musical terminology here. It really captures the ear and builds to a wonderful climax. To this day, I still don't have strong feelings for the rest of the symphony, but I'm sure with more time I'll grow to love it. That said, I listened to it on YouTube and liked it. What's more is that I didn't have the presence of mind to buy the same recording that I listened to on YouTube. I just bought the first recording I found on HD Tracks and left it at that. I didn't find out until later how different recordings of the same work can be. I got lucky, and the one I bought seems to be of very high quality. My next increment of musical progression was Fly Like an Eagle and Book of Dreams, purchased a month after Fly By Night. Interest in these two albums stemmed from my dad liking Steve Miller Band and hearing singles on the radio. I even bought the song Fly Like an Eagle long before I ever bought an album, and before buying an album was even a concept in my mind. I don't remember listening to these albums on YouTube. What I do remember is listening to the Steve Miller Band's Greatest Hits cassette that summer and liking some of the songs. After some digging on Wikipedia, I found out that these two albums contain most, if not all, the songs I like from the Steve Miller Band. I think I went in hoping I would like the albums as wholes. I'm still trying to like Fly Like an Eagle as a whole, but I do like Book of Dreams, hence its inclusion in my list of my favorite music last year. For my birthday senior year, that's September 2017 for those of you not in the know, I got a boatload of music. There's a bunch more classic rock from the formal Beatles, Lennon and McCartney, in the form of Plastic Ono Band, Imagine, and Band on the Run. These ones I definitely trialed on YouTube. I was looking for good stuff the former Beatles made after the breakup. The thought went like this: they made really good stuff together, maybe they can make something worthwhile alone. I go back and forth on the Lennon albums. There are good bits and less good bits, but as for the Band on the Run, I think I've liked it from the start, except for Bluebird, which I think is kind of boring, sue me. But that's not all. This was also the time I bought all the electronica I own, 3 albums from Zweihander, Earslayer, Nitherin, and Holenthal. I got them for a bargain too, $8.66 for the whole shebang, another steal. This rivals the Godspeed You purchase, now that I think about it. This was also the first time I bought anything on Bandcamp, a great site if you're looking for more recent and less mainstream music, though sometimes some old stuff like Deceit gets put on there too. Like I said in the last video, I got these albums because a YouTuber I followed made them and put bits of them in his videos. Liking the bits, I dove in, hoping I would like the holes. Shortly thereafter, 11 days after, Luciferian Towers was released. I pre-ordered it and got it on release day. Guys, don't do this. I had no guarantee it was going to be good, but luckily it was. It just took a while to realize it. I sort of poo-pooed it in the last video, but in the last year I've grown to really love the album. I don't consider it a letdown from Godspeed You's previous work at all. Onward and outward, in the February of 2018, I bought Hot Fuss. I believe I was exploring what singles I liked, and I somehow came across Mr. Brightside. I had heard it in the car with my mom before. In any event, I ended up listening to Mr. Brightside on YouTube a bit, and somebody told me showed up in the recommendations, which I had also heard in the car with my mom. Listening to it on YouTube and liking it, I guess I noticed they were from the same album. From there, I must have listened to the rest of the album, liked it, and bought it. It was only $4.12, so there you go. I had my first indie rock sort of album. And now the final music purchase I made before the last video. In late March, I got 2 more albums from Bandcamp, Winter Hymn Country and Secret Hymn, and Stubborn Persistent Illusions, both by Do Makes I Think. I found them by looking around the Wikipedia article for post-rock and the website of Godspeed You's record label. I still like Winter Hymn as much as I did last time, perhaps more, but I also like Stubborn Persistent Illusions much more than I did last time. Now we're on to stuff I haven't talked about in a video yet. We're treading new ground onto the great expanse that is the continuation of history, the place where what we were and what we wanted to be meet in an eternally fruitless cycle of self-improvement, forever destined to desire more yet never attain, a pitiful gaze into a bleak future filled with
Get on with it! Yes, get on with it!
Oh, sorry. After I made the last video, there was some good activity and some nice recommendations. Jacob and Lucas got into McCartney's post-Beatles work. This culminated in Jacob finding a good song by Paul and showing it to Sean, Lucas, and me on the way to Lucas's cabin. It was Heart of the Country on RAM. Later, I listened to the rest of RAM on YouTube while doing some project in the garage, probably fixing headphones or messing with speakers or something. I ended up liking it a lot. Besides that, Lucas got heavily into my list of favorite music and soon started recommending me things by McCartney and Queen and Led Zeppelin and so on. And just as soon, a pattern emerged where he would recommend albums to me and I would end up not liking them. Whether I didn't like them because they weren't my style or because I didn't find them myself, I'll never know. Anyway, Lucas recommended me Led Zeppelin's first 2 albums. Inevitably, I didn't like them, but I realized that Led Zeppelin 3 had Immigrant Song on it, which I loved. If I was to like and buy Led Zeppelin 3, I would have to get to it before Lucas did. Luckily, Lucas takes forever to get through albums, so I had enough time to try Led 3 on a family trip to Fairbanks. Thus, I had liked Led 3 before Lucas made me not like it, and all was well. To be fair, I like a bunch of songs off the albums that Lucas recommended, I just didn't feel compelled to go out and buy any of the albums. Also on that trip to Fairbanks, I tried out Out of the Blue, which has Mr. Blue Sky on it, which I also love. I discovered that song when I watched Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and loved it immediately. The soundtrack to Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was sitting around the house, so I listened to it a bunch. I even showed the song to my friends one time after school, but they didn't pay it any mind. Undeterred, I pressed forth with my love of this one song. On the Fairbanks trip the next year, I ended up liking the album just out of the blue. Just enough to buy it. Next, I liked Dreamboat Annie by Heart, as you know, but their next album, Little Queen, didn't get the same treatment. I tried it while finding music for my last video, but I thought it was boring and left it alone. But then, after I made my video, I came back to Little Queen just to make sure I didn't like it. And on the second go-around, though, I thought it was really good, even besides the big hit Barracuda. Liking it so much, I naturally added it to my collection, but this little chapter isn't over yet. Around this time, I was also looking for more post-rock. I felt like I had already exhausted Godspeed You and Do Makes I Think, so I spent a lot of time on Wikipedia and discovered that Godspeed You had a spin-off group that did some lyrical and instrumental stuff. I started exploring their discography and quickly settled on their second album, Born Into Trouble as the Sparks Fly Upward. And with that, I decided it was time to buy all this new music. So on the 8th of August, I bought Ram, Little Queen, Led Zeppelin 3, Out of the Blue, and Born Into Trouble as the Sparks Fly Upward in one go in a singular expansion not seen since the birthday of 2017. Yet my hunger was not sated, far from it. What I haven't told you is that I spent a large part of that summer trying desperately to break into a whole new genre, jazz.
You like jazz?
Yes, I do, Barry B. Benson, but I didn't start that way. Yes, like you, I started as a normal boy roaming the streets, knowing nothing of musical culture. Then I found the Beatles, and so gained a solid foundation to build my musical empire. In a few years, I took a small album of post-punk, but pursued that chase no further. Instead, I directed myself to Godspeed You and their fabled post-rock. Having conquered Godspeed You, I went forth into the static but deep world of classic rock. I even picked up a symphony along the way. Classic rock no longer containing my conquest, I ventured into 8-bit electronica and brought Zweihander into the fold. Seeking ever more lands to tame, I journeyed deeper into post-rock with Godspeed You's latest release and Do Makes I Think's different take on post-rock. At this point, not even a lowly indie rock album was safe, and that summer, I trekked further into the heart of both classic rock and post-rock in a great expansion. Now it was time. I knew it. From my now great kingdom, I could see new lands, waiting for my iron hand to come and rule them. This great vastness was jazz. At first, progress was slow. I spent a great deal of resources researching and testing different styles and artists to no avail. Miles Davis, Charles Mingus, and John Coltrane alike would give me no purchase. Once I came across free jazz and Cecil Taylor's unit structures, This proved far too horrendous and terrible for me to overcome. Even Thelonious Monk, my greatest hope in this seemingly fruitless land, eventually turned, and he too gave me no satisfaction. With heavy losses and dwindling resources, I retreated. With nowhere else to turn, I told my friends of my plight. They were of no help, save for the prophet Jacob, who had been to those lands before. He told me of Mingus's 3 great pieces. I went back to the wastelands and listened, but even Mingus's moaning turned out to offer no foothold in this strange new land. But not all was lost. I returned to Monk and his 1962-63 quartet and found their disposition had improved. Soon, trade had begun with these newfound allies, and my empire had expanded. This expansion resulted in 2 great pacts, Monk's Dream and Crisscross. It was August 14th. With these, I had staked my piece of jazzdom for my imperial estate. Not much later, I faced a new challenge, college. Even in this strange place, I could not ignore my thirst. By this time, my fancy had drawn me to chamber music, small group classical music, a far cry from the symphonic music I had known before, but something egged me on. I read about the strange atonal movement in classical music in the 1900s and was intrigued. This brought me to Schoenberg and his early work that wasn't atonal but was sort of on its way there. Finding a suitable recording on YouTube and finding it didn't push me away, I soon decided to acquire this interesting new style of classical music. Around the same time, I also discovered something else on YouTube. Scrolling along the recommended videos list as I often do, I saw a curious album cover and an equally curious title. I listened to the first song before I got out of bed and thought it was pretty cool. So after I made breakfast, I listened to the rest of the album while eating my morning pancakes. This album was Meanie and Kichi. I thought all was well and good, so I even showed it to Max that afternoon. He agreed, and I ended up buying both albums in early September. So that's one more classical and indie rock album under my belt. Right after that, I started reconsidering more of Thelonious Monk's discography, and I ended up liking his album Straight No Chaser despite his extreme length relative to the other jazz albums I had from him. Monk's Dream tops out at 46.3 minutes with a maximum track length of 8.6 minutes, while Straight No Chaser comes in at a staggering 61 minutes with a max track length of 16.7 minutes. Jesus. Those of you who know way too much but not quite enough might interject and say,
Morgan, Straight No Chaser as an album from 1967 must have been originally released on vinyl, which can only reach, say, 56 minutes at the extreme and before audio quality practically tanks. How, then, could this album be 61 minutes?
A valid question. Well, originally released on vinyl, Straight No Chaser was edited down to fit on a record. It was only 51.4 minutes in that case. When released on CD, 29 years later, the full length of all the tracks were restored. The more you know. I got the CD in the mail on September 24. For more flavor, I'll describe my next gambit in my idea of Oldish English. A translation into our modern idiom will appear on screen. In the new year of 2019, my fancy had curiously taken me to the modern music of the Negro. I blame my brother for this. It was his constant advocacy of this so-called hip-hop music that turned me onto the whole scene. The astute among you might have noticed some of this in the Compendium of Music I Hold Most Dear I published in yesteryear. Save for my writing it down, that was entirely my brother's doing. In any case, it was that January when I ventured to listen to some hip-hop music in earnest. On my lovely holiday back home, I found the music of one Kendrick Lamar most satisfactory whenever my brother commenced showcasing it on rides in the automobile. Feeling so, I decided to pursue this music further, and one day in my quarters I grasped my electronic tablet contraption, donned my head-mounted sound emitters, and went about listening to Mr. Lamar's latest album, blasphemously titled Damn. In spite of the profane title, the music spoke to me, and in no time at all I was physically expressing my enthusiasm for the colloquially termed sick beats. Upon returning to my studies after holiday, I set forth to listen again to an old band that captured my interest, Do Makes I Think. A frivolous name, but nonetheless the year prior I purchased 2 collections of their work. In listening to them again, I hoped to assure myself that I wasn't foregoing any worthwhile music, as my interest is oftentimes wayward as the wind, and so the sale of my musical curiosity necessarily takes me away from treasure islands before I can plunder them. Looking over my charts, I wanted to go back and review some of the promising waters I had been through previously. On this most fruitful of endeavors, I discovered that indeed I had been led astray from bountiful waters. In this case, a collection of pieces called And Yet. Another frivolous name, but yet again I purchased it, along with Mr. Lamar's Damn. I believe it was the 5th of January. With that strangeness over, the next March, I was browsing the HD Tracks homepage like any other idiot and noticed there was a Women's History Month sale. I also noticed a striking album cover and title. This was Regina Spektor's What We Saw from the Cheap Seats. I think you know the pattern by now. I listened to it on YouTube, liked it, and bought it on March 30, on sale. Moving on. Meanwhile, I kept on trying to find more jazz and classical in the midst of college. Try as I might, no other jazz artist had just what I was looking for besides Thelonious Monk. What I was looking for was a small group. I had heard big band jazz for band class a bit, but I didn't care. High audio quality. There's a ton of jazz from before and even after 1962 that sounds like I'm just listening to a tape and not a performance. Good tunes, free and modal jazz just sounds like a mess to me. No guitar, I get enough guitar from classic and post-rock, and jazz guitar sounds piddly to me anyway, and totally acoustic sound. I didn't even know this would be a problem, but I discovered that past a certain point in time, electric piano and double bass amplified via pickups became the norm, and they sound different and aren't what I'm looking for. Amplified bass sounds especially bad, and I adore the sound of a 100% acoustic bass. I was looking at this Monk album called Underground and found out that one of the tracks had vocals, which I was very wary of, but at some point I caved and decided to try the album anyway to see how it goes. How surprised was I when I listened to it, and it was astounding. The vocal track has some scat in it, which isn't my favorite thing in the world, but it's totally tolerable for 55 minutes of great jazz. I don't have to tell you what I did next. As for the classical part of my interests, I discovered a piano trio, that's a piano, violin, and cello piece by Rachmaninoff, and I was captivated by it. Imagine a long, sad, virtuosic piano piece with the violin and cello thrown in, and this trio is what you're imagining. It's great. I won't tell you what happened next, but let's just say I have a few more CDs in my room since May 3rd. Finally, we come to my latest purchase, another Monk album, this one called It's Monk's Time, which I've been sort of evaluating since mid-March. It came in the mail on June 23, not much more to say. And there you have it, all the studio albums I've never bought. And if you think this is where it ends, then you underestimate my power. There are still yet more albums I'm looking at. There's another Supertramp album that has been stewing in my awareness for a few months. It's called Crime of the Century, and from whatever sources online, I got the impression that it was a good album, so I set out to listen to it. I started with Rudy sometime last March, probably, and I liked it so much that I showed it to Max, and he liked it too. Besides that, I've made a big push this summer to find more classical music, and Tchaikovsky's piano trio is very promising. He made it because of Nikolai Rubinstein's death, and Rachmaninoff made his trio because of Tchaikovsky's death, so it's only natural that I would have both trios. In addition, I've been considering another Do Make Say Think album, Goodbye Enemy Airship, The Landlord is Dead. When I was making the last video, I considered it along with the rest of Do Make Say Think's discography, but I thought the second half was kind of boring. I've gotten over that, and now it looks like I'll get it eventually. Finally, it looks like there are ever more classic rock gems to be found, and Axis Bold as Love is one of them. This summer I started investigating Jimi Hendrix's discography because he's so famous and stuff. His second album, Axis Bold as Love, sounds great and quickly caught my ear. Soon I got into his first album, the original UK version of his first album anyway, and this similarly caught my ear. A great contributor to this is Hendrix's unusual songwriting style. He has a songwriting style so descriptive that it reminds me of rap, how it fits a lot of words and explanation into a short duration. In normal songwriting and poetry, it's my impression that you leave out details and shroud things in implied meaning. If you just went out and said everything completely, that would approach prose, but sometimes with Hendrix it seems like he's leaving more of it out there, to some extent. Also, Hendrix is black, and if his songwriting is somehow a precursor to rap, that'd be kind of neat. Also, he's the only singer I know of to have used shucks and necessarily in song, so there you go. Oh, and very recently I've been getting into Mahler's Ninth Symphony after watching Leonard Bernstein's lecture series, The Unanswered Question. I don't know if I'll buy it, but it seems promising. And there you have it, a summary of my music history up to this point. Next, we'll get into other topics like my music library management. A possibly not unreasonable person might ask of me, Morgan, why would you go through all the trouble of buying your music directly? After all, managing this ever-growing library has cost you many hours of slaving away on your computer. Wouldn't that time be better spent listening to the music you speak so highly of? All of this doesn't even mention the much greater cost of buying all the lossless music instead of getting a music subscription. After asking them how they know so much about me, I would address their plotting with a couple points. Complete customization and ultimate audio quality. Let's start with complete customization. Since I own the files and have them to manipulate freely on my computer, I can do a great number of things not possible with the subscription. For example, I can change all the tags on all my songs. Normally this doesn't matter much, but in some instances there's some neat stuff I can do, like go from the US version of Magical Mystery Tour to the UK version, including changing the album art, which lets me put the leftover singles into past masters, which then separates into two roughly equal length sections, 1962 to 66 and 1967 to 70. I can even reconstruct the never-released Yellow Submarine EP, including editing Across the Universe by deleting the tacked-on intro and pitch correcting the song. The most extreme example of this tag editing also includes separating longer tracks into smaller tracks. This is the case of Lift Your Skinny Fist Like Antennas to Heaven. See, Lift Your Skinny Fist is made up of 4 sides of 2 vinyl discs. When you buy it or stream it, it shows up as those 4 tracks, and everything's hunky-dory, right? Wrong. Those 4 sides are further separated into smaller subsections, complete with their own titles underneath the title of the section itself. With complete customization and some fiddling in iTunes, I can list the titles of the 4 sides and acknowledge that the subsections have their own titles as well. If you think that's overspecific and erotic, you're right, but owning the files allows me to be those things in peace. Before I go on to ultimate audio quality, I need to explain pulse code modulation. Don't worry, just imagine a sound wave, like this. Say we wanted to approximate this wave. Naturally, we could approximate it with a series of line segments, right? And since any line segment can be defined by its endpoints, we can just use points to approximate the wave. That's the essence of pulse code modulation. In fact, there's this thing called the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem, which proves that with a sufficiently high number of points, the approximation of the waveform is perfect up to a certain frequency. And since humans can only hear up to a certain frequency, there's a number of points that makes this approximation a perfect approximation for sound waves. But so far, we've only talked about the resolution of the points in the time dimension, which is called the sample rate, the number of points present for every second. The other dimension we'll call the sound pressure, and the resolution of the points in the sound pressure dimension is called the bit depth, since the sound pressure is encoded using a certain number of bits. With 1 bit, the sound pressure can take 2 values, with 2 bits, 4 values, and 3 bits, 8 values, and so on. Since the values encoded in the bits most often won't be exactly the same as the value in real life, there is error in the approximation. This error surfaces in the sound as noise. With more bits, the approximation will be closer to reality and there will be less error and less noise. For example, here's some audio encoded at 16 bits per sample, 12 bits, 8 bits, 4 bits, 2 bits, and 1 bit sound. Now we can represent the sound wave in both dimensions, time and sound pressure. For humans, you can hear up to 20 kilohertz. A sample rate of 40 kilohertz is enough to represent all the frequencies we can hear. As for the bit depth, 16 bits per sample is enough for most listening situations, unless you listen to music extremely loudly in an otherwise very quiet environment. What I'm saying with all this is that CDs, which encode audio at 44.1 kilohertz and 16 bits per sample, are pretty much at the limit of human perception. The compressed music that's offered on most streaming services is kind of at the limit of human perception as well, but not quite. Under normal circumstances, I'd be surprised if I could ever tell the difference, but under some circumstances, the fact that I'm not getting a perfect approximation is more obvious, like when I listen to the difference between the left and right channels, for example. If we listen to a few seconds of my favorite song compressed at Apple Music quality, it sounds like it should. But if we listen to the difference between the left and right channel, the approximation becomes immediately apparent. There are audible artifacts which are not present if we listen to the lossless version of the song. All in all, I don't want to pay for a version of my music that sounds different, even if that difference is normally inaudible. So that said, for most people it doesn't matter and they don't care, which is fine. I do me, you do you. On top of that, I can edit the files however I want, which means I can fix occasional imperfections in the sound, like in a few songs where there are audible pops, or in the case of this recording of Verklarten Nacht, slight high-frequency noise. I can sometimes fix the former by smoothing out the waveform and eliminating the pop, and the latter by filtering out high frequencies. See? Pop. Now, no pop. On to taste. I'm a layman when it comes to music theory. I just go in and see whatever music sounds good. I go like Mark Applebaum says in his TED Talk by asking, is it interesting? This is the chief question in my mind when deciding whether I like some music. Since I really don't have much in the way of ear training, I don't go in analyzing what chords fit perfectly to the meaning of each lyric or resolve logically in a progression. Not to demean anyone who does that, but it's just not what I'm after. I just ask myself, is this interesting? Do I like hearing this? And could I see myself listening to this periodically for the rest of my life? Because that's what I'm trying to do by buying albums and managing them so carefully. I'm trying to build a collection of music that I'll listen to every now and then, at least once a year or so, until I die. Sometimes it takes a while to come back to an album, but I've kept up this goal for all the studio albums I've ever bought so far. Those are the basic questions with all this, and sort of my goals in collecting albums. Let's dig into some elements of music or albums that I particularly like, starting with album art. I have to admit that album art has a non-zero effect on the album selection process. In a different universe, maybe I would say something along the lines of,
I don't even bother to add the album art. I just care about how it sounds, man.
But I spent a long time managing album art along with the sound files themselves. The most extreme example of this caring for album art again brings us to Lift Your Skinny Fists. I don't own the vinyl version of this album, which would undoubtedly give me access to the highest quality art. I don't even have it on CD, which would still be very good compared to any digital version of the album art. Online, as far as I can tell, there's no super high quality album art for Lift Your Skinny Fists, so during winter break at the beginning of the year, I set out to make my own high quality album art. I found a high resolution picture online and put it through a vectorizer to make all the lines really sharp. After a whole bunch of cleanup in an image editor, I took a picture of some paperboard on the back of a notebook and overlaid it on the cleanup image. Now I have high quality album art for Lift Your Skinny Fists, which will keep me going until I get the vinyl version sometime, maybe. I've done far less extreme editing for a bunch of the album art I've amassed, but because I care. Besides that, I think album art definitely adds something to the experience. I'm not totally sure about the extent of its significance, but album art like this definitely doesn't make me want to listen to these albums, and album art like this is a bit weird for me, and I'll just pass it by before I might get attached to the music itself. And album art like this makes me want to listen to this album until I find out that it's 2 hours long, but it looks really cool, doesn't it? With that out of the way, let's talk about my love affair with bass, specifically double bass and bass guitar. This all probably started with the Beatles and McCartney's great bass playing. Listening to songs like Rain and Dear Prudence and Taxman really made me love a good bass line. A number of years ago, I even went on YouTube to look for cool bass-related videos and came across such gems as Upton Bass and The Bass Lesson. On Upton Bass, I would watch videos where Gary would showcase basses and play them a bit. I thought they sounded really cool. In Godspeed You's music, later on, I got a range of bass rolls and timbres, from the quiet but present bass support on a track like Lift Your Skinny Fist Like Antennas to Heaven, to main stage presence on a track like Motherfucker Equals Redeemer. To sawing distorted lines at the start of Balladic. The other non-Beatles classic rock albums I got had bass, of course, but nothing as outstanding as Godspeed You. And when I got to Do Makes I Think, they had even more cool bass stuff in store for me, like the awesome melodic bass in Her Eyes on the Horizon. I was listening to it as I wrote the script for this video, and I just had to physically manifest the joy this bass line brought me. Like, it was electrifying. All of this is saying nothing of the fantastic bass playing in Winter and Country and Secret Hymn 2, but we need to move on. The next sort of big leap in bass for me was jazz bass. When I first got into jazz with Monk's Dream and Criss Cross, I wasn't impressed with the bass playing. They mostly played walking bass, and the bass is frequently overpowered by the rest of the quartet. It's pretty hard to hear. It wasn't until I got into Straight No Chaser that I started to love jazz bass. In Straight No Chaser, there are sections where the saxophone and piano stop playing, and the bass and drums duet, and it's great. I've never heard anything like it. In a lot of music, the bass part isn't super interesting on its own, so whenever the bass can come out and play something fast and interesting, I just love it. This newfound love of jazz bass led me to go back and watch this video from Upton Bass of 2 jazz basses playing. I also watched this video of Thelonious Monk's quartet playing, which has some cool bass solos too. Then, when I listened to Underground and found even more great bass playing and even some bowed bass, I was in heaven. All in all, I like bass, so there you go. All this talk of bass flows naturally into discussion of drums. There was actually a time when I didn't like that drums were in all my Beatles songs. I thought that since drums weren't harmonic, they didn't contribute to the musicality of the songs. Obviously, this was before I realized that I lacked the skills to appreciate harmony in any meaningful way, and that drums add a lot of interest to a song in terms of rhythm and timbre. I made this realization sometime before I bought Leningrad. In that symphony's first movement, there's a very prominent snare drum, so prominent in fact that the snare drum became part of my criteria when looking for more symphonies. That ruled out a lot of earlier symphonies like those by Mozart and Beethoven. Anyway, my dislike of drums was dumb, and at some point I acknowledged that and took a much greater interest in drums. This interest evolved in much the same way as my bass interest. First was the Beatles, and despite Ringo's reputation as a bad drummer or whatever, he's done some great work for the Beatles. Just listen to Samurai Guitarist's defense of Ringo.
No one would ever say that Ringo has the best chops in the world, but his feel is undeniable and his musicality is as good as it gets. He first and foremost plays the songs, and there's a lot of beauty in the simplicity he brings to the table. We should all strive to be a bit more like Ringo.
Anything on Abbey Road exemplifies his playing pretty well. We'll just ignore his occasional cymbal abuse and move on to Godspeed You's drum use. With 2 drummers, you'd hope the drum work would be freaking amazing, and it is. From the intricate drum parts in their earlier work on a song like Broken Windows Locks of Love Part 3, to the absolutely huge sound on a track like Balladic, to the limitless excitement on songs like Anthem for No State. I just have to drum along when I hear that one. Where the drum and bass evolutions diverge is with Led Zeppelin. There would be no Led Zeppelin without John Bonham. I guess there would be no Led Zeppelin without any of those guys, but you get the point. John is like Ringo if he was way more technical and exciting, because John could do cool things like fast bass drum rhythms and rolls. I can't say the same for Led Zeppelin's bass, which is mostly just hard to hear. In addition to Godspeed You's two drummers, Do Make Say Things two drummers also tear it up, even on a simple rhythm like at the start of Frederica. That gets you so ready for what comes later. There's awesome stuff like that all over Winter Hymn and Stubborn Persistent Illusions. Go check it out. All this was great preparation for when I got into jazz. Well, not exactly. In most situations, the jazz drumming I'm familiar with is actually pretty conservative and not overactive, something like this. What I'm really talking about are the drum solos. I've grown to really love them, and Ben Riley really does it for me. I'll skip over my obvious liking of all manner of guitar parts because if I discuss that, I might as well just go through my whole collection, and writing the script is getting a bit long in the tooth, as it were. Instead, I want to talk about lyrics. Sometimes the lyrics really make the song. The best example I have of this fact is Big Rock Candy Mountain. It's just a guy singing in a simple guitar part. The reason it's in my list of favorite music is entirely based on its lyrics. It's just a bit over 2 minutes, but it has more lyrics than most songs I know of. This is the case of near 100% reliance on the lyrics. Like, without lyrics this good, the rest of the song is basically worthless. That's one way to be. The next step is to have most of the weight on the lyrics, but with maybe 25% of the burden on the rest of the song. This is the case of Pride, I think. See, in this song, the lyrics are awesome and make the song, but the beat is also pretty good, though I'd never listen to it in isolation. The next logical step is the 50-50 split. This is the case of something like Stairway to Heaven. Here, the music and lyrics are both killer and meet on a high plateau to lift each other up to even greater heights. Finding a song that's only 25% reliant on the lyrics is challenging since, in my experience, bands that try to do this are compensating for somewhat poor lyrics, but since they're not a full instrumental band, the rest of the music is hard-pressed to stand on its own. The only really good example I can come up with is the Beatles' I Want You, You're So Heavy. This song's extra lyrical content, that's stuff beyond the lyrics, is so good that it took me almost 5 years to realize that almost all of its lyrics are contained within this string. I want you so bad, babe, yeah, it's driving me mad, she's heavy. For the longest time, I just unconsciously assumed that there were more lyrics than that, but when I listened to Abbey Road again on June 14, I realized that there were only 13 words in the whole song. Now, as for songs, or instrumentals rather, that have no reliance on words, you could pretty much choose any instrumental from my collection. See, since instrumentals can't fall back on lyrics for interest, they have to be really good for me to care. This gets you things like Sleep by Godspeed You. Granted, there's a 75-second monologue at the beginning, but the following instrumental brings you on a ride going from heart-rending lamentation to equally powerful joy and celebration and hope. There's this one guitar line in particular around 17:30 in the song that gets me every time. I won't play it here because I want you to experience it for yourself if you're so inclined. If you're not so inclined and you won't do a little work for some emotional payoff, then that's your problem. But it's an experience every time I listen to it, and I can't recommend it enough. Besides the emotions evoked, Sleep also features some of the best guitar use and the best drumming I've ever heard. This brings me to a TED Talk by Rowan James Curtis, in which he talks about how classical music has the greatest emotional range. I want to modify this statement by positing that instrumental music has the greatest emotional range. Obviously, this isn't a universal truth, but let me explain what I'm thinking. See, I have a lot of lyrical music, and maybe it's just because most of it is somewhat popular. It's not popular to be sad. But pretty much all of it occupies a sort of middle ground of emotions. In listening to a lot of the classic rock I have, of course I can get excited or say, that sounds really good, but it's not really getting me to the peaks and valleys of joy and sorrow. Even something like Admiral Halsey makes me happy with its joviality, but doesn't move me terribly high. And a sad one like My Mummy's Dead can come off as whiny. The words sort of get in the way. But with instrumental music, there's less opportunity to criticize a person and more opportunity to just listen and let the sounds take you where they will, man. On top of that, the instrumental music I'm talking about, mostly post-rock, takes you through a gamut of moods in each song or in each album, and this makes the joy and hope shine brighter against the backdrop of bleakness. See, the sad parts don't subtract from the happy parts, they actually multiply the happy parts, making them more precious. The scarcity makes the happy bits more meaningful because duality and stuff, Anyway, music that takes you with it through a range of emotions is cool, in a word, moving, so check out Sleep, guys. I want to talk about the lyrical equivalent of abstract art, at least in my mind. See, with most lyrics, you can follow pretty much exactly what's happening. Take Rain, for instance. As you can see, this is a song about rain and people's reactions to it. Cool, I can dig it. But then let's look at a song like Kashmir. okay. There's a first-person perspective description of some stuff. You get some vibes of a desolate land and some otherworldly beings. There's also suggestions of some kind of narrative, but nothing's too clear. This is what I call abstract lyrics. I also like to call it songs about nothing. See, with these kinds of songs, I don't care what it's supposed to be about or if it makes a ton of sense. I just care that the lyrics sound cool or stir some emotional response. It's kind of like this abstract art piece. Obviously, this is a man at a knife grinder, but it's not interested in giving you a realistic depiction of a scene, just some suggestions, and it looks kind of cool to boot, Let's look at one more example of this. Meredith Godrow, better known as Gregory and the Hawk. All her songs are meaty and kitschy, and these selections fit the songs about nothing description more or less. And even her song Oats We Sow, which is clearly about the strife of breaking up with someone, has these references to a girl on a mountain and a mowing crow to throw in suggestions of a world behind which she's singing. To me, it's like words getting on the level of music, not definite in black and white, but suggestive and open-ended. I guess all lyrics are like this to the extent that lyrics are poetry, and poetry is suggestive and sparing on the details, but I just really love Godrow's songwriting and wanted to put some words to that effect. Another songwriter I love is Jimi Hendrix. In his first 2 albums, he sounds so much different than other songwriters, which I latched onto right away. He sounds conversational at many points and seems to be talking at you, as opposed to other singers who are talking to the air. Other singers are like actors performing in the play, and Hendrix is kneeling on the stage talking at the first row. At least I get that sense a lot in listening to his first 2 albums. Let's listen to a few quick excerpts to see if you get my meaning.
That's all right, I'll still got my guitar. Look out now. Maybe it's just a change of climate.
Nobody know what I'm talking about. Got my own life to live.
So now you either get what I'm talking about or you don't. To end this topic, I'll point out another great song in the same vein as Sleep, and that would be Little Wing. Particularly the guitar line at 137 gets me every time. Real quick as well, Play the Game by Queen is really good too. The guitar solo in this one similarly gets me. Moving on, I really want to talk about Kendrick Lamar's Damn. I see his writing as antithetical to Godrow's. Rather than being about nothing, they are indubitably about real events or issues or experiences. Apparently this is termed conscious hip-hop, and I love it because it's not just music in the wind, it's speaking about real, serious issues. There's weight to every word he says, like, hey, this matters. And to top it all off, the words are frickin' golden. I'm sure some of you don't care much for rap, but to me, the lyrics in Pride, Triple X, God, and Duckworth are all immaculate. And when I was first getting into this album, there were times when I couldn't stop myself from listening to these songs 2 or 3 times in a row. I mean, what can I say except, holy shit, I love these songs. Seriously, singing along to the sliding pitch-shifting vocals in the first verse of Pride is so fun, and when the drum comes in on Duckworth, I just have to move my arms. There is no negotiating that.
Oh, Lamar, Hail Mary, your marijuana times is hard. Pray with the hooligan, shadows all in the dark.
At this point, I want to talk more about how I got into jazz, emphasizing the power of desire and choice in exploring new music. The original rationale was like, country music is bad and awful, I'll leave that alone, but is jazz so universally awful? I mean, I like the jazz in Fallout New Vegas, and jazz musicians are really good at what they do, and supposedly jazz has lots of cool stuff like advanced rhythms and harmonies and virtuosic solos. The rationale was there, but when I tried to get an album I could jive with, the jazz came up short. But I really wanted to get into it, and this drove me to try again after a break, and I sort of did it. I decided on those 2 Monk albums that I thought were agreeable, but if I'm being honest, I wasn't in love with them. The only thing holding me on to the whole ordeal was this desire and choice to like this music and keep listening, so I held on, even to the point of buying that 3rd album with its marathon-like durations, but I still didn't love the music. I remember saying to Max one time that listening to these jazz albums is fine, but I find it's hard to focus on them, and I'll often drift into other thoughts as I'm listening. Even so, I pressed on with determination that there was something to be loved within this music. And something near the beginning of this year, I finally found myself finishing Straight No Chaser and thinking, that was awesome. I'm so satisfied that I listened to that. Sometime later, I found myself alone in my room, or alone in my dorm, vigorously air drumming to the drum solo near the end of In Walked Bud, having a grand old time. All bets were off now. I was super into jazz, at least these few albums I familiarized myself with. Then, in the first week of June, I listened to Monk's Dream and Crisscross for the 8th time. The 8th time! Finally really enjoying them for the first time at a visceral level, not just like, oh, this is agreeable, but like, yes! I love this music! And then when the CD of It's Monk's Time came in on June 22nd, and I listened to it on June 23rd at about 2:45 in the morning, needless to say, I was very pleased. The reason I'm telling you this story is to point out that breaking into a new genre is hard and takes a lot of effort and could take many months, but it could also lead to great new experiences and loving more things. Let's think about this for a minute. I like Godspeed You, a large group with 2 drummers, 2 bassists, 3 guitarists, and a violinist, and an extremely electronically processed sound. At the same time, I also like the Thelonious Monk's quartet of 1 drummer, 1 bassist, 1 saxophonist, and a pianist, literally half the size of Godspeed You, with a completely acoustic sound that's like 4 guys with some instruments just showed up and played for you. Liking these 2 very different things is fine, because when you put in as much time as I do listening to music, variety makes life so much better. Right now, I'm in the middle of listening to all my classic rock again, and I haven't listened to post-rock for 2.5 months or electronica for over 3 months. I reviewed some of my post-rock to help me write this script, and the excitement I got was indescribable. Absence truly does make the heart grow fonder, because I had to stop myself from listening to all of Stubborn Persistent Illusions there at my desk before I ruined it for when I actually lie down and listen to it maybe a few weeks from now. So yeah, if you're ever going to explore a new genre, you have to put Herculean effort into it, and someday you might be very glad you did. I'm talking to you, Travis.
I don't like instrumental music.
Instrumental music is great because you can come up with your own interpretations of what it's all about. It's like in a novel where you can imagine for yourself how each scene looks, what the character sounds like, how a character's face looks, and so on. Sometimes these interpretations take a long time when you're as unthinking as I am, but after 3 years of listening to Lift Your Skinny Fists, I've finally come up with an interpretation for the whole album. See, the album starts very happy, maybe the happiest Godspeed You has ever sounded. I think of this as a happy birth, like, the beginning of a life. Soon, though, the album turns more dark, first with governmental or authoritarian overtones, then with religious ones. Maybe this child has entered school and society at large, facing some type of oppression from authority. The next part of the album turns really avant-garde, which I see as the now teenager rebelling against convention and being really weird, sort of that awkward phase. The second half of the album begins with a monologue basically lamenting how things have changed. This one's pretty obvious. The now young adult character has realized what they've lost with their childhood gone. Right after the monologue begins an intensely mournful section. I think this represents the character entering a lonely and uncertain world of strife, but then the music seamlessly transitions to some of the most magnificently joyous music I've ever heard. Please listen to Sleep, guys. This, I interpret, is the adult character meeting a significant other, a companion with whom to face the world and its twists and turns. This meeting is cause for celebration, I presume. The last quarter of the album begins with a little song prominently featuring a baby in the lyrics. I think you know what that means. Anyway, the last quarter of the album continues and eventually comes to a recording of children speaking French. The character's baby is now an elementary schooler, I guess. Then we get to the first proper Godspeed You music in the last quarter, and it's celebratory and contented. This is the character entering middle-agedness, filled with purpose in a fulfilling line of work. The penultimate section is a droning one. This I see as the character in retirement, somewhat dull, but life continues. The ultimate section features drones of a different quality, the more active and joyous, which I interpret as the character realizing that they've led a good life in the end and they're ready for death and the end of the album. A whole life going by in the course of an album, like incredible stuff. You may have noticed that I've mentioned Lift Your Skinny Fists many times now. Well, that's because it's a great album that approaches the sublime. If you don't know about the sublime, I suggest a Wikipedia article on the topic. I really like that album, but I also like many other albums, so here I am to talk about the concept of loving an album, at least as I like to think about it. It's analogous to making a friend in many ways. Like, at first it might be kind of uncomfortable. I famously hate trying new albums and have a lot of trouble making friends. All my latest friends I've just made via another friend, and mostly Andrew. Before that, the last friend I made on my own might have been Lake in 8th grade. Anyway, once you're a little familiar with an album or a friend, it's a lot easier to talk or listen to them. As time goes on, the conversations get deeper and you feel like they'll probably be your friend forever, so that's cool. As I accumulate more albums, I hear each album less, but that just makes each meeting sweeter and I enjoy their company even more. Soon they're part of your mind. They're not just some noise you hear or some face you see, they're sort of part of you. I'm getting all warm inside just thinking about it. And in many albums and friendships, there are certainly some duller parts. Can I honestly say that I'm ecstatic listening to 2 minutes of rain sounds or sitting in Andrew's car or listening to nearly 3 minutes of one tone or or getting grilled by Max over miscommunication, or listening to 6.5 minutes of avant-garde droning most people would dismiss as garbage, or awkwardly eating dinner in Sean's cabin. No, I'm not ecstatic doing those things, but that's not the point. The point is that pretty soon that stuff is going to turn into a merry celebration and rock climbing with Andrew and an epic finale to a 40-minute album. And watching anime with my best friends, and literally my favorite song ever, and an hours-long ski race that's an experience of a lifetime. See, loving something lets me enjoy less exciting stuff, like Shlomo's Son or some quiet time with my roommate. I live the dull moments to also live the moments I'll remember forever, because not every song will send your heart racing, and not every interaction will make you wish you were nowhere else. So anyway, I like my albums, and I like my friends. Art and friendships are alike in other ways further. See, in today's postmodern society, the significance of what happens in the world and the universe is dubious. I can't honestly say that I'm advancing my genes, I've done good, my life has purpose. That's ridiculous, and my philosophy professor said as much at the end of the semester. He said that the meaning of life is whatever you want it to be. Whatever trade or profession you choose, or whatever hobbies you pursue, that's your purpose. Anyway, music and friendships, I think, are what give my life meaning. They're what let me appreciate moments that would otherwise be lost to the endless mundaneness of living, and give meaning to what would surely be swept away along with the rest of ultimately insignificant happenings. You see, I think we all agree, except for maybe you religious folks, that the meaning of all this is unknowable, so we face a paradox where the final meaning of it all is unknown, yet we live on as if things matter. We can't live life with a true belief that nothing matters. Why live at that point? Art and friendships are nice because they give us something to perceive as significant, and by association, maybe we're significant as well. They also stir emotions and feelings which make them real and even more significant. Finally, art and friendships are nice because when you've consumed so much news, as I have, and you've heard so much how people do horrible, horrible things to each other, sometimes you shoot away from somewhere like, oh my god, humans are doing things! Oh no. What? It's just art? They're just friends? Oh good. They're not oppressing each other. What a relief. Okay, guys, I don't actually shoot a wick like that. It was just for effect. So, how do we move on from here? I'll tell you how. By disregarding it and coming back to it later, because I still have a few music things I want to talk about. In listening to all this music so closely, there are some details that I've noticed and enjoyed that I've noticed. Little things like Ringo's snare buzzing when he hits his bass drum in his drum solo in the end. John Bonham's squeaky bass pedal in several Led Zeppelin songs like Since I've Been Loving You. Larry Gale's messing with his bass while Ben Riley is soloing on In Walked Bud. The end of And Yet sounding the same as the beginning of their next album, Winter Hymn. And Ben Riley's bass drum sounding different on these recording dates than on these recording dates. So that's cool, close listening and all that. My next little thing will begin with me acknowledging the immeasurable pile that is recorded music. Now, I'm acknowledging this pile, and I have to say it doesn't really matter where you start or where you go in this immeasurable pile, as long as you like wherever you are and where you've been. I liken it to the universe, like wherever you are, it's the center, or there is no center. Like, can I really criticize someone for disregarding the Beatles or Mozart or Godspeed You? Like, I disregard Brian Eno, supposedly one of the popular music's most influential figures. Am I obligated to listen to and worship him? Of course not. So wherever you are, go, or been, if you think you're fine, you're fine. Someone could say, oh, this album or this group changed music forever. Great. I'm glad they did that, because music is all about borrowing and innovating anyway. Adam Neely has a great video about this. Actually, it's about a lawsuit involving Ed Sheeran, but he talks about the derivative nature of music as well. The point here is that everything owes everything else for everything to some extent. Like, can I honestly say that I would be here today without the Islamic Golden Age? No, I can't, because the fact that everything is influenced by things preceding it is assumed. So, thank you, Islamic Golden Age, but I'm going to go on with my life and not concern myself with endlessly thanking you. And that leads me to another thing, the sentiment that there's no good music anymore. This is a bit ridiculous. Yes, the music of the 60s or 70s or whenever happened and won't happen again, but this is because things are a product of their time. Maybe you don't like pop music nowadays, I don't usually either, but there's certainly good music out there if you put an ounce of effort into finding it. The good music today might not be famous or have decades of reputation behind it, but it's out there. It's just hidden in a sea, nay, an ocean of other recorded music. There are a ton of little niche communities around very specific genres online. It's your job to find them. So back to the immeasurable pile for a second. So you start somewhere, but where do you go? I like to think of a musical journey like this as a random walk. It's probably not random, but I want to flex some math terminology on you and relate it to music, as is my want. An example of a random walk is just some coordinates, let's say 2 coordinates, that randomly change one of their coordinates by +1 or -1 for each step. With a bunch of steps, you might get something like this. I think of it as a random walk because there seems to be a lot of happenstance involved. What if I never explored the rest of Godspeed You's discography, or was even recommended Godspeed You, or looked around for more post-rock, or went back and listened to And Yet a second time? What if I never gotten into computers, or watched Tech Syndicate's channel, or went back and bought Zweihander's discography? What if I never made my last video, or this video? What if I didn't try so hard to get into jazz? What if I didn't choose to listen to Median Kichi, or What We Saw from the Cheap Seats? What if my little brother listened to bad music, or never played it in the car? My musical journey would probably be pretty different. So yep, whatever music you like, that's fine. You want to disregard the Beatles? That's fine. I'm currently disregarding Mozart, Brian Eno, Buckethead, yes, Avec les Soleils Soldats de la Bouche, and many, many more. Next, I want to talk about dynamics in music. This is one area where I don't like modern popular music. With music as a non-foreground thing and intense competition for the average person's attention, a lot of music nowadays is geared to have a similar volume throughout. This makes it easier to listen in the car or on earbuds out and about since you don't have to worry about quiet parts and loud parts. It's all kind of the same, so you never have to mess with the volume control. For example, I listen to music a lot in between classes in college, and when I tried to listen to classical or jazz in these conditions, I had to mess with the volume a lot so I could hear the quiet parts and not get overwhelmed by the loud parts. But when I listen to something mainstream like Hot Fuss, I didn't have to do that. This dynamic flatness is good in this case, but it makes the music lose some dimension when I listen intently in a quiet setting. Like when I listen to classical or jazz or post-rock in my quiet room, I think it's really cool when the music gets noticeably quieter. Let's take Shostakovich's 7th Symphony's first movement, for example. At one point, it's this quiet. And you might not even be able to hear it. At another point, it's this loud, which contrasts excellently with the quietness. This range is one of classical strengths. A very recent album like Damn has many tracks that have severely limited dynamic range. Now, I still love the album, but definitely not for its dynamic qualities. Besides jazz and post-rock, I found one classic rock album that has dynamic range worthy of praise, and that's Crime of the Century. All the tracks have a very healthy amount of dynamic range, and I think that's just great. Those are a few thoughts about dynamic range, but what about temporal range? As a budding music listener only familiar with the Beatles, I probably thought that a 7-minute song like Hey Jude was pretty long. How little I knew. Now, when I listen to even 20-minute epics like Sleep or Melodic, I don't mind at all. It's definitely an acquired taste, and I'll admit the pacing is a bit different than other music, with more use of repetition. An album like Asunder that's basically a 40-minute epic is still quite a sit-down, but even so I enjoy it because I think it deserves the length it has. The same goes for a song like Magic Man. I think it's just as long as it needs to be, or deserves to be, and everyone's happy. Not every song deserves to be as long as it is, though. A song like Paper Planes just doesn't cut it. If you listen to it closely, you'll notice every verse in the song gets played twice. It's just padding, and I once cut it down to about 2.5 minutes, which made it much more palatable, but it doesn't need to be over 3 minutes. There's a similar story with some songs on my beloved Out of the Blue. On a bunch of songs, Jeff Lynne is just milking each song for all it's got. Like, he's right on the edge of it being unacceptable, but I already bought it, so I'm stuck unless I start hating it for some reason. With some pruning, those songs could be better, because not every song needs to hit 3.5 minutes. All the songs on Revolver, a great Beatles album, scarcely hit 3 minutes, if that. And Meredith Godrow's songs frequently land on the shorter side, and they're still fantastic. All this talk extends to albums as well. Median Kichi doesn't even break 34 minutes, but it's no worse for it. If it was padded to 45 minutes, I might not have even bought it. It's right where it needs to be. Same with Lift Your Skinny Fists or the White Album at nearly an hour and a half. They're right where I like them. Even so, I think the more extreme long lengths can make music less accessible, mostly when someone's listening for the first time. For example, Hendrix's third album is over 75 minutes long, and I've been reluctant to dive into it. Damn is Kendrick Lamar's shortest album, and that probably helped me get into it. He probably could have pumped out another 68 or 78 minuter, but then it might not have been as good, with the junk possibly diluting the gems. I appreciate his restraint, or maybe his lack of content, in making his latest album only 55 minutes. I kind of want to try the rest of his discography, but it's going to take a long time since those albums are so long. Something about hip-hop that makes artists make stupid long albums. Like Outkast has 3 albums that are over 73 minutes long. Like, geez, it's just because a CD holds 80 minutes of music doesn't mean you have to fill it up all the way. Right before the end here, I want to say some words about some of the albums I got since making the last video. We'll start with Led Zeppelin 3. This album's pretty cool because it shows Led Zeppelin doing more than just hard rock, with some more acoustic songs and some more normal electric-y songs. There's even a song called Friends that's about what it sounds like it's about, which is touching coming from the band that has a song about the way you squeeze my lemon. So yeah, the versatility of Led Zeppelin is nice to see, and the music itself is really good too. There are even a few instances where Jimmy Page shows off his rare fast playing, which I love to hear. I give it an A. On to the next one. Born into Trouble as the Sparks Fly Upward. This one is interesting to me for a number of reasons. First, it's much more acoustic than other post-rock albums I have. Far from totally acoustic, but there's definitely more of it than on Hallelujah, for instance. Second, it has lyrics, unlike the rest of my post-rock. Granted, sometimes it's really obnoxious and annoying, like on Take These Hands and Throw Them in the River, but on Built Then Burned, there's a cool spoken word intro that's kind of like a pep talk for a revolution.
Dear brothers and sisters, dear enemies and friends, why are we all so alone here?
It's inspiring in a weird, unserious sort of way. And on Could Have Moved Mountains, the sad but somehow hopeful lamentation of potential versus reality is also interesting. On the whole, a nice addition to my post-rock repertoire. Finally, I'll talk about Crime of the Century, an album I haven't bought yet I've already done a close listen of. It seems that somewhere along the line, Supertramp decided that they would make a good album. For their first couple, they just phoned it in, but on the third, one of them was like, "Guys, I have an idea. Let's make an album." Another would interject, "We've already done that twice." The first would reply, I know, but this time, and hear me out on this, we'll make it a good album." "Oh, great idea, Frank." "I know, Mike. Let's do it." And it was so. Seriously, guys, this album is just quality. You get through the first couple songs and you're like, that was alright, I can get behind this. Then the third song, Hide in Your Shell, comes around, and you get punched in the face with the best song you've ever heard. And after the first few lines, you're like, holy shit! Whoa! I can't handle this much good in one sitting. But it keeps coming after you, line after line, and verse after verse. Just quality. I'd quote a few lines, but I'd end up just singing the whole song and ruining it for you when you listen to it for the first time. Anyway, it's a good album, highly recommended. It seems we have reached the end, so I'll return to that thing about friendship. I want to end this by thanking my friends. I do this on Thanksgiving, but holidays are just approximate angular positions of the Earth relative to the Sun that we have given names. Those constructs are in no position to stop me, so here goes. Sean and Max for being such good people, no matter what you think of yourselves. Travis, you're also a good guy, but I want to thank you for complimenting my first video and expressing an interest that led me to make this one. Andrew, for being such a positive and outgoing person in a world of genuine hardship and injustice. Kyle, I wouldn't classically call you one of my best friends, but I want to thank you nonetheless for being such a wholesome guy and reaching out to talk to me at length, despite knowing me fairly little, in a phrase, becoming my friend. And Lucas, for intensely considering some of my favorite music, a feat as yet unmatched by any other. And thank you all for giving me the gift of conversation at one point, or many. Here at the end, here are some recommendations for further entertainment. As with last time, there's a PDF of all my music in the description. It's really just down there in the event that the impossible comes to pass and you let a piece of paper recommend music to you. If you want to explore some instrumental music, there are several avenues you can take. As for post-rock, I think Winter and Country and Secret Hymn is the most accessible. Lift Your Skinny Fist Like Antennas to Heaven is pretty good too, and Stubborn Persistent Illusions is very exciting. In terms of electronica, there's just the 3 albums, pick whatever you want, though the last one is the most exciting. If you have a classical bent, the first movement of Shostakovich's 7th Symphony is pretty fire, so is Rachmaninoff's Trio Elegiac No. 2. If you're totally off your wagon and want to try jazz, I think Crisscross is the most accessible and entertaining for a beginner anyway. There are also a bunch of music videos on YouTube you could try out. There's Upton Bass if you're weird and want to hear a bass in isolation. There's a pretty good video on there of a jazz bass duet. There's also the bass lesson by Jay Lenhart. He's pretty funny. Samurai Guitarist has some cool videos, as does Adam Neely. I actually binged most of Adam's videos a bit ago. It's very interesting. Leonard Bernstein also has some long lectures about the origins of music, some history of classical music, and a 20th century art crisis that are pretty cool if you can get through them. There's also the video of the Thelonious Monk's quartet playing live, which I have on DVD because I'm crazy. There's also a video of Godspeed You playing live, which is interesting for me. For you, you'll get to see how much Godspeed You is just a bunch of weirdos. Finally, there are some TED Talks by Mark Applebaum, the mad scientist of music, Benjamin Zander, a funny conductor you should give a listen to, and Rowan James Curtis, an advocate for laymen listening to classical. He's a nice guy. Go give him a watch. It seems I'm at the end of my rope. Better climb back down to the mortal plane. Bye. I'm going to go listen to some music. Actually, I'm going to go edit this video, but someday I'll listen to music again.